We have Dan Antonelli, the man himself, the head honcho over there at KickCharge Creative. Dan, why don't you give us a quick and dirty about where you started out and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, I mean it's insane for me because this is our 30th year from when I founded the company, but it actually started 10 years prior to that when I was probably 15 or 16. So I was always just fascinated with lettering, hand lettering, airbrushing, pinstriping, hot rods, all that type of stuff. And I started doing lettering for contractors, and they would bring their vans to my parents' house, and I would letter their trucks in my parents' backyards. And I'll tell you, I always just felt this enormous sense of pride, like when I was done, and then the truck would be leaving, and then I would see the truck on the road later on, and I would say, I did that. And what's bizarre to me a little bit is it's 40 years later, and I still get excited when I see our work out in the public. If I'm traveling somewhere and I see a billboard that we designed or a brand that we created. So I became fairly obsessed about lettering, typography, graphic design from a very early age. And it was just, kind of bizarre that, in high school, I would go home and I would hand letter alphabets like on hours on end. And my friends were like, "Hey, let's go hang out." I'm like, "No, I'm going to go home and letter some alphabets." And so I probably wasn't the coolest kid in high school because that stuff doesn't really play very well in high school. But I think just really being obsessed with how to always improve, how to always be better. And I think that's never really left in terms of my passion about what we do. So while it's great, the awards and the accolades and the things that we do that get a lot of attention, I always look at those things as just milestones along the way where I say, hey, it's great. Like that's super cool that we did this and we've got, this reaction and this happened because of it, but it's not good enough. Like tomorrow's got to be better. Like so that drive I think is what has always kept us on top and always innovating, always improving and never being complacent with what we're doing today. So it's been a remarkable journey. We have over 50 employees right now, which kind of blows my mind a little bit. And they're all really passionate about, building brands that change people's lives, and they're excited about what we get to do and how we get to positively affect so many contractors' lives with our work. There's a big wall wrap in our office that has pictures of maybe 100 or so contractors in front of their trucks with their families, their employees, and it says right on top, it just says we build brands that change lives, and that's a constant reinforcement, so that everyone on the team is aware of how important our role is, and knowing that our work has the potential to really affect a business. So it's a responsibility we don't take lightly, and that I'm, really fortunate and grateful that we were able to do. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's been
100%.
crazy.
That's awesome. When I think about the work that you guys do compared to traditional agencies or even other branding agencies, I think it's so cool how tangible your work actually is and how you can, like you said, go out in the wild and see it and understand like, oh wow, this is real stuff that's happening out in the world. I think for so many of us who work online or do digital work in any capacity like myself, it's hard to see the fruits of your labor sometimes because it's not as tangible. But I think that's the one of my favorite parts about what you guys do, because even I've seen stuff. I mean, I've seen A1 garage door trucks and I've traveled to different states and different cities and been like, oh my God, there's there's an A1 truck, and Dan and his guys did that, and even other plumbers things around here in Colorado. I'm like, that's a kick charge design right there. I think it's so cool. When it came to branding, were you guys always like, oh, we're going to create brands, or did it start out more along the lines of graphic design and logo design, things like that?
Yeah, I think initially when I started, the vehicle was a huge component for what we did initially, and that's where my background was. So I was always very interested in how you create an image and how that image is then applied to this physical canvas, right? So I
Hmm.
was always thinking about how does this logo need to live in that environment? And I think that perspective is sometimes lost, especially as you look at corporate branding or design agencies that primarily work in that particular space where that is not the priority of the brand. There are other things that have higher priority. But for me, it was always trying to figure out and recognizing that the vehicle was actually the single most important application of the logo and for that company because it's the most visible one. It's what the community sees, right? They never see the website unless they go to the website, but they'll probably see that truck in there in that town. And so how do you build a brand and have this logo be something that they want to look at and that they want to remember it and recall it later on. And I think that that's the part also that we focus so heavily on, the psychology behind how you build a brand that people can recall later on. And certainly my book talks a lot about the notion of disruption and how disruption affects consumer psychology. And I think over time I got to do that, but not necessarily know why it was working, right? And then I studied more about the psychology behind consumer behavior and consumer purchasing decisions and really put all those pieces together. And I think that that's the part that is often missing in a lot of home service brands is they don't necessarily have a brand, first of all, that was ever designed for that medium, right? So the vehicle becomes an afterthought. Maybe the web design guy built their logo, looks great on the website, looks awful on the side of a truck, things like that. And also the reality is that most home service contractors don't engage with a branding agency when they start their company. They engage maybe with the sign shop, and not to say that there aren't decent sign shops or wrap companies that know fundamentals, but there's an awful lot that don't know the fundamentals. And so a lot of the times the brands that they have built do not function in a proper manner for that. So, obviously we do a ton of redesigns and stuff like that, but I always say it would be nice if literally on day one, that part was dialed in because you wouldn't have to redo everything, when you get to $2-3 million in revenue. So a lot of our clients are probably in that $2-3 million revenue point where they've outgrown the brand that they started with. And they know that the brand that they have currently won't get them to where they want to go in the future. So we try to fix those things. And we're also just really, really cognizant of the relationship between brand and marketing spend. And I
Yeah.
think that that's the part too, where so many contractors are struggling with, oh my God, my marketing spend keeps going up and up and up, and my return on that investment keeps decreasing, right? More competitors, the fact that Google is charging so much for every lead that you're getting. And so we really try to think about how do we become 5 Mile famous in the community that we serve without having the heavy, heavy reliance on Google to deliver those results. Like, what if everyone within 5 miles of where your home office was knew that you existed? Would you need to spend as much on your marketing? Would you need to rely on Google to deliver every ad? What if everyone just knew your name? And in my book, I talk about this crazy stat that like less than 10% of the people know the name of a home service contractor when trying to find one. Like imagine that. Like so that makes them so dependent on Google to deliver a result or lead aggregators, things like that. But wouldn't it be nice if they just knew your name? Maybe they're not ready to buy your service today, maybe not in 6 months, maybe it's 9 months or a year later. But what was the name of that company that I saw in my neighbor's driveway? They had such a cool name. They had such a cool truck wrap. Oh yeah, that was the name of the company. And they just simply typed in the name of that company, right? So that's a lot of the psychology behind what we do. Certainly we look at how the brand affects the KPIs that matter most for home service contractors. So you look at booking rates, close rates, customer acquisition cost, even average tickets are radically affected by brand. And while there's a sales component to it that obviously affects average tickets, the real challenge that most home service owners have is they have these brands that don't instill the confidence required to command the dollars that they're asking, right? So that's another typical challenge you see. Guys like, oh, I can't get that much money for my work. And then you look at the brand and I'm like, yeah, I know why you can't get that much money for your work because you don't look like you deserve to be paid for what you're asking, right? So connecting all those dots is certainly a lot of what I've spent the last 30 years trying to figure out. So
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I want to dive into some of the more details that you bring up in your book, like kind of the psychology behind it, and what all that means. Because I love your philosophy around building bold, disruptive brands that really make an emotional connection with the customer before any service is
Right.
even
Yeah.
performed, right? I really like that. But before we do that, I want to define brand. I want to define that word. What does brand really mean? Can you help us understand from your perspective what does it mean to have a brand? What is a brand?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of definitions. People say, a brand is what people say about your company when you're not around, which is partly true, right? I think it is a term that is thrown around and people don't necessarily think, oh, well, the brand's just my logo. And like, well, no, the brand, we look at the brand as being the summation of all the things that are externally focused, and also to a certain extent internally focused. So in the book, I talk about a brand wheel, right? And in the center of that wheel is actually your logo. So your logo is an important part of your brand, but it's just sort of the hub, right? And everything builds from around it. So your story, your voice, all the graphics that are built around it, the messaging, right? So a lot of it comes from that hub. And if you don't get that hub right, then it's hard to build a wheel, right? If you think about building a wheel, if you have a bicycle, if you've got a broken hub, it's really hard to build a round wheel. Can you build a wheel? Yeah. Could you roll it? Perhaps. Will it cost you a ton more money if it's not done well? Yes. Right. So that's sort of the idea that we have. So all the channels that utilize the logo and integrate the logo, the voice, the messaging, all those things, your social media, your billboards, your trucks, your uniforms, any messaging that goes out, a lot of it stems from that foundation. If we don't get that foundation right, really hard to have everything work properly. So, you sort of look at the notion of, there's a great quote from Roy Williams from Wizard of Ads that says, overspending on marketing is the tax a business pays for being unremarkable. And I think that
Mm,
that's what we try to solve is we try to build brands that are remarkable in the sense that people can remember them, that they want to remember them, that it connects with them on a deeper level or an emotional level. And those connections are proven to aid in being something that can be recalled later on. So, one of the biggest chapters in the book is even on naming, right? Which is the number one thing that contractors get wrong literally the day that they start their company. It's the biggest mistake they make is what they name their company, whether they choose their last name, which is always a mistake, or whether they choose like their initials, like, hey, I'm going to be CK Heating and Cooling because my initials are Charlie, Klatz, whatever, right? So like you start day one and now you've already behind the eight ball and you're going to have to work so hard to overcome that deficiency from day one. So naming is one of the most important things too, because again, how do you have a brand name that I might want to remember versus something that I need to be instructed or shown repeatedly what it means? So people are like, well, there's so many last name brands that do really well. I'm like, yeah, but it's taken years to develop maybe what that reputation is. Wouldn't it be better if literally from day one people thought something positive from that brand name or that experience that they may get before they're hired? So yeah, a lot of those things I think, and it's part of why I really wrote the book, quite honestly, because I was just like, well, first of all, there isn't a book on home service branding, like there just is not. There's a lot of corporate branding books, but
right.
a lot of that stuff is actually not applicable or as applicable to a home service company, right? So I said, let me just dump as much as I possibly can from the last 30 years of my life into this book, and hopefully again, if you're on the fence of starting a company or you have a company that is thinking about trying to get to that next level, it'll help illustrate why the brand is so important. I've had guys that are a few years into business read the book and message me and are like, I'm sick to my stomach right now. Like, I'm like, I don't know if that's quite the endorsement I wanted from the book, but it's like I'm sick to my stomach because I realize I've been doing all these things wrong. And it's been costing me so much more money because no one knows we exist. My trucks blend into the environment. There's no reason why anyone would ever remember. Like all those things they've been fighting, but they just haven't been able to figure out how those things are affecting all the other components, right? So yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I want to talk more about what makes a good brand. I know that's a very broad statement, but like you said, there's kind of the hub, right, of the logo, and then everything branches out from there. And there's the story, there's the messaging, there's all these different things, right? But in the easiest way you can we summarize what defines a good brand from something that's either not good or like a corporate brand, like you say, that's really not what home services is really built for?
Yeah, I would say, well, what is the promise, right? So if I were to judge the different pieces of information that your company has presented to me, whether they're visual, whether they're written, or whether they're spoken, what do I believe the promise is of your brand, right? What can I feel like I might get if I chose to hire you? So I'd sort of look at brand as um, what can we be doing to control what Mrs. Jones thinks about your company before you ever get to answer the phone, respond to an email, or ring their doorbell, right? If I can control what she thinks, because ultimately she wants to do business with people she knows, likes, and trusts. So how does the brand communicate those key components? How is it as a brand that she remembers having seen, so she knows them? How does it communicate that if I chose to hire them, I would get this great experience? And also, trust is a huge factor for any home service contractors because homeowners in general do not trust contractors. So, how does the brand speak to those biases? How does it speak to all the things that they are afraid of? And also, at the same time, how does it live in their mind rent free, right? So those are kind of the key things for a great brand to have. And a lot of them maybe have one piece of it, or or have none of it, right? And they work so hard to overcome that. So I think that that's the part too where people don't necessarily put those connections together. Additionally, like we're talking so much about external, right? What does the brand function from an external perspective? But the other component is how does it help from an internal perspective? What does it do for culture? What does it do for morale? What does it do for recruitment? All those components are also benefits of having a strong brand because it looks like a place I want to work at. It looks like a company that cares about the team. It looks like they're investing into the future of my employment, right? So if I see that they're reinvesting to try to do all these things to create a better environment for myself, well, then that also affects my performance, et cetera, right? So I think people generally look at brand as very externally focused in terms of what it can do from their marketing perspective. And then they realize after they've invested in branding what it's done from a cultural perspective, which is a great thing that happens, especially from an owner perspective, because you see a lot of owners just get very re-energized about their company when they invest in branding. And no one comes to us and is like, Dan, well, I need to be re-energized about my company because I'm feeling kind of stagnant and flat. But ultimately, like it's like bam, like you see how excited they get about this direction, and they really, I think it's just like levels them up at the same time. So it's kind of cool to see that too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's talk about your portfolio for a little bit because you've worked with some very notable companies in the home service space that most, if not everyone in home service would recognize, like A1 Garage Door. I mean, Eco Plumbers, Electricians and HVAC you did. I mean, I'm just looking through my notes here. You guys have done a bunch Godel air
Yeah.
conditioning, like
Yeah.
some Grasshopper heating and cooling, which I've seen around. Um, I think that's really cool. You've worked with some really big names. Talk to us a little bit about some of those projects and some of the things that you had to overcome. What were some details there that you had to come in and say, okay, well, A1, ew, yikes, there's a few problems here that we really need to address. Well, what are those things? I'm curious.
Yeah, no, I mean, even doing Tommy's brand, and I think Tommy's brand is a great example for people to really look at because you could look at Tommy's success at the point he decided to rebrand, which was about
Right.
30 million in revenue. And most people at 30 million in revenue would never think that the brand was holding them back, right? Like
Mm,
who's doing 30 million in revenue and saying, shit, man, my brand sucks. I need to rebrand and I should do everything over.
right.
But listen, Tommy's one of those people, and I think the characteristics of Tommy is very similar to the characteristics of Aaron Gaynor, and people like that are just not complacent, and they also recognize that what got them to where they were currently was not going to get them to where they wanted to go in the future. So Tommy recognized the fact that his trucks looked awful, his branding looked awful, and it didn't look like a premium home service provider of garage door services. So he reached out to me and I said, yeah, I mean, the trucks were awful. The logo was terrible. And I said, but we can fix it. I said, and for him, like we just looked at what assets or what equity did his current brand have that maybe I could bring into a new brand. And really, the only aspect of his old brand was that Tommy was featured on all his marketing and his trucks, right? So that was one thing I was like, okay, well, there's been a lot of impressions of Tommy, right, in his branding. So I thought, well, that's something that maybe we want to leverage and capitalize. And then he had a color scheme that was red and black. The red was the one thing I said, well, I can keep the red, but the black I didn't want to keep because red and black are not very warm colors, not very inviting colors, not very premium colors. So we changed the color scheme to be red, dark brown, and ivory. So we softened the overall presentation of it. We created obviously the A1 caricature of Tommy, professionalized sort of the way the trucks would be designed and how they would be communicating his services. Deleted a ton of crap that was on his old trucks, like Google, logos, Facebook logos, social media logos, like all this crap, like words that should not be on the truck. And we just distilled it. And I think that's the other piece too, is right, distilling all this information into its purest form. It's not about adding, it's actually about subtracting. How much can we subtract? Because the more we subtract, the more impact it actually has, because it's not too many things that confuse the viewer, right? So I think the great lesson with Tommy was just the notion of complacency. I have this saying that the saying is success in spite of a poor brand is not a valid reason to perpetuate it. And I think a lot of people get very complacent to what has got them to this point while failing to recognize that, hey, this actually isn't going to get us to where we want to go. And I think the question that I would say for anyone that's listening is just saying, hey, take a look at your truck, take a look at your branding, and you tell me, does it actually represent what you provide today? Or does it represent what you provided 3, 4, 5 years ago when you first started? Right. And because those are the things that factor into Mrs. Jones looking at your brand, and she is going to make those decisions based on what she sees. She's going to make those assumptions based on what she's presented, right? You may go in there and you may kill it afterwards. Maybe you get the job and you guys are the best provider of that service. And she's a true believer after. But you got to think about how many people that don't ever get to that point that don't know. And they just look at this impression and immediately they think, well, he's cheap, or it may not be professional, or I don't know if they're going to show up on time, like all these things, right? And maybe you can overcome those objections just because you have a great sales team, and maybe that's fine. But there's a lot of people that won't bother to make that or take those steps. So again, brand should be helping to control that conversation before it even gets to take place.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that I'm just, as you're saying this, I'm thinking of, I mean, companies that I've worked for, companies that I've hired to work on my house, companies that have just are around my area that I'm thinking, man, I'm thinking of these guys, like these guys could use it. These guys could use it because I know for a fact that they're a great company. They want to serve people well, but
Yeah.
they're not communicating that up front. You have to actually go in and experience the company to understand that. And I think, especially in the age where we're at of, I'm seeing in kind of the general consumer psyche a really big push for authenticity. Like I
Mhm.
think the age of social media and the age of influencer and all of the media that we have surrounding us in every aspect of life is has been really inauthentic for the past 10 years. And
Mhm.
be in 10 years ago it was fine because that's what people wanted to see the glitz, they wanted to see the perfect of everything. But now I see consumers are getting tired of that, and that carries over into, I mean, services, right? Any service-based business, but especially home services when you're actually working on these people's dwelling, right, where they live.
Yeah.
um, and I think that authenticity so often gets lost in branding because, like you said, either they're not communicating the service, the quality of service that they provide now, or they're communicating that they are just like everybody else, right? There's no
Yeah.
difference between them and the next guy. And so I think
Yeah.
that I love what you guys do, and I think that it's, from a consumer perspective, it's an amazing way to show that you are someone who can be trusted because you are authentic. And it also obviously helps with metrics, right? You talk about in your
Yes.
book a ton about how branding, like you just said a couple of sentences ago, affects the most important metrics in marketing. I mean, I have in my notes here that for Comfort Calvary Heating and Air, you guys saw 121% increase in revenue within 6 months of the rebranding, which is insane. And again, All City Plumbing gained $187,000 boost just 3 months post rebrand. So I want you to talk to us a little bit about why brand affects these metrics so heavily and how so many people miss out on improving these metrics because they're just worried about spending more money on ads or just finding a new agency because their agency sucks or anything other excuse that they might have.
No, absolutely. I think that that's the part that I spent so much time, especially on the second edition of the book that I just released in May, was the data behind it. Because you can look at a brand and you could look at a logo or a truck or a website and you'd be like, oh my God, like that looks amazing. That's awesome, right? But what does it actually translate into is the bigger question. That's the question that's always fascinated me, because in as much as I love to make beautiful things, I'm really more interested in how those beautiful things affect the metrics that matter. So I'll give you an example of a client, of a company that I have a relationship with that does digital marketing, and they've done the websites for a couple of many, I should say, KickCharge clients. And I said, can you do me a solid, like run some reporting looking at benchmarks like branded keyword searches on companies that have a KickCharge brand versus ones that don't. So they actually like compared 25 KickCharge branded websites that they had worked on to 25 that did not have our brands. And it was, what was really interesting is that the KickCharge brands were showing, I think it was 550 branded keyword searches per month for the actual company name, compared to 50 for the companies that did not have a KickCharge brand. So that's of course
Wow.
25 different, comparing 25 and 25 different companies, right? So it's a pretty decent,
Yeah,
you
that's a good
know,
sample.
sample set, right?
Yeah.
So then you're like, okay, so that means that the people with a better brand, their actual brand names are being searched 10 times more than the ones that do not have a good brand, right? But
Yeah.
then, okay, so now they come to the website. Now what happens, right? And the conversion rates were double as well. So it had a 12% conversion rate with the companies that had a KickCharge brand versus a 6% conversion rate for the companies that did not. So again,
Wow.
what is this telling us? Well, it's telling us that that visibility in the community matters, right? That having this brand that people have recognized on their neighbor's driveway or driving down the street or in the supermarket are leaving an impression, and those impressions are helping them choose that company more so over the company that has the generic logo or the white van or the, the sun and snowflake logo for the HVAC company. Like none of those things are connecting with them, right? So that was one benchmark. But I think the other benchmarks that we looked at, certainly, I mean, revenue increases. I mean, there's a ton of case studies on our site that talk about that, which is fine. But I also just think when you look at return on ad spend and you look at the KPIs like booking rates and close rates before and after a rebrand. And those are really, really striking. Like we've had clients that literally doubled their average tickets as one, and then, even improved their booking rate by 15, 20, 25%. Now imagine if you improved your booking rate by even just 5%. What would that actually translate in terms of revenue if your average ticket is $1,500, right? Like so you look at some of these metrics, and to me the whole answer to your problem a lot of times from marketing is in those metrics, right? So you could look at a company with a lousy booking rate and a poor close rate and low average tickets, and like, okay, well, that could be a staff problem, right? Because, if they're not answering the phone correctly, et cetera. But sometimes it's actually a marketing problem. So I love looking at the data behind this stuff, because you could look at the metrics through something like Service Titan or even a company like Searchlight, which all our digital marketing clients are on Searchlight. So Searchlight helps us really hold ourselves accountable for our digital marketing efforts, because you can't hide from the data. But so much of the what the company needs to be focused on is in that actual data, right? So I think that part is also, recognizing the relationship between brand and those KPIs. And if you improve some of those KPIs just by 5%, what would that actually equate to in revenue? So that's why it's sometimes funny when people are like, oh my God, branding is so expensive. And I'm like, well, how much is not branding costing you, right? What is it costing you on all these other things? And I think, and I will say, like, no one goes through the rebrand process and then 6 months later thinks that they overpaid on branding. It's always like, oh
Yeah.
my God, I should have done this so much sooner, because they see the true impact it has on them, right?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Um, let's talk a little bit more about your book. You've been publishing books for a while. I mean, you even back in 2000, you
Yeah,
released your book called Logo Design for Small Businesses, and then you released a second edition of that in
I did.
2004,
Yep.
which is awesome. And then, like you had just mentioned, you originally released your book, Branded Not Blanded, in 2022, and then you
Mhm.
had a redesign that came out, or a republished that came out in May.
Yeah.
Um, Talk to us a little bit about why books? Why did you want to put this information out in a book? I mean, tons of people do webinars, tons of people do podcasts like this, tons of people just kind of keep all that information internal for them and then just use it for their own benefit. Why do you like publishing this information?
I think for me, especially with the last book, I I saw the same mistakes being made over and over again, right?
Mm,
And I kept on saying to myself, why don't these guys know any better? Like, why don't people understand this
mm,
and recognize what they're fighting against and how to fix it and how to solve it, right? Because you could go on Facebook, you could go on all these home service Facebook groups, and you see guys proudly putting up their truck wrap, and they think, oh my God, like, look how cool my truck wrap, and you can't read it. It's totally done unprofessionally. Like, and I'm just like, sometimes I'm just like, oh my God, guys, like, why don't you know any better about this particular topic? And then I sort of realized, well, why would they know? Like,
yeah,
you know
yeah,
what I mean?
right,
Like, it's sort of preposterous. On one hand, it's like me knowing how to run a line set for an air conditioning system. Why would I know
right,
that? Right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
so I said, I almost thought to myself, like, imagine I'm working for another contractor and I'm thinking about starting a home service business. What would be the most useful thing that I could do to put myself on the best trajectory from day one? So that's why I wrote the book. And I just
mm,
thought, let me just put, I mean, essentially, like I said, like 30 years of what I've learned, and just put it out there. And hopefully it helps a lot of people. I mean, you look on Amazon and you can look at the reviews, and it's really, it means a lot to me to read the reviews, because I know that it's impacted so many people. And when
yeah,
I look at sort of what our mission revolves around, I can't help everybody. Like, we can't help everybody, but my benchmark or my measure of success is how many lives can we impact. And I can't always impact people, or I can't always only impact people that are clients. I can impact people in other ways. And I've had a lot of people that never became clients but read the book and then knew at least what to be looking for in their own branding. And if they were
yeah,
working with another designer, understood the mission much better, right? So I think that um, that this type of content, very niche, doesn't really exist.
yeah,
It really doesn't. There's a lot of corporate branding books, and I always thought too, even when I wrote the book before this, which was called Building a Big Small Business Brand, that there was such a huge difference between corporate branding and small business branding. And there were a ton of books on corporate branding, and it was a lot of pie in the sky bullshit. It was a lot of stuff that made no real sense for a small business, because small businesses did not have the same budget that a corporate entity would have to market
right,
their brand. So I always looked at it as like, well, what can we do for a small business that wouldn't require a huge amount of money to have a significant amount of impact, right? Because they need to have that brand work harder. I can't rely on millions of dollars of advertising to get you understand a meaningless symbol or graphic on the side of a
yeah,
truck. You know
yeah.
what I mean? It needs to work harder. So I think just trying to compile that information and share it with as many people as possible, is part of what my responsibility should be as someone that's got this experience. Like, it's my job to really try to help as many people as I can with that information, is kind of what I look at.
Yeah, totally. And I like how you guys take the approach of it's like you're building relationships here. You're not just handing over a logo or design pack and saying, here you go, put this on all your shit, and then disappearing, right?
Right.
Like you guys are actively like every day in and day out actively in these businesses seeing, okay, how can we improve this? How can we improve that? Because you don't only do logo design and truck wraps and things like that. You guys do other digital marketing
Yeah.
services as well. So talk to us a little bit about kind of what is your approach towards that long term, right? Because a lot of people think that, okay, I'm going to pay all this money to get this rebrand, right? And it's going to go up on my website and I'm going to get my trucks rewrapped and great. But how does this actually build over time? Because I think
Yeah.
that's one things that so many people miss is you can't just throw a bunch of logos at stuff and then be rebranded and then all of a sudden, great, okay, it's done, right? Like everyone's going to know who I am. No, there's a lot that has to go on after the fact to actually build up that trust. So tell us a little bit about what your approach is there.
Yeah, sure. So, over the years, we started seeing sometimes where it was clients would just use us for those initial things, like the logo and the truck wrap and maybe a couple of things. And then they'd have other people do some of these other things. And we'd start seeing immediately the brand being degraded
Mm,
and being misused. And it always was driving us crazy. We're like, well, why are they not integrating the brand properly? And part of that was just they didn't know that we could do some of these other services. So part of that was actually on us that we didn't, you know, have them know what we could be doing. And so we started calling them like brand catastrophes, right? So it was like they had this amazing brand, and then I would see an ad on social media for recruitment, and I'm like, oh my God, it's the wrong font, it's the wrong colors. Like, what happened here? Like, who's doing this for you? And so a couple of years ago, we set something up basically where we could not only handle obviously the initial things, but help them on the journey. So we have this program called Power Hours, which allows us to basically play an active role in everything ongoing. So if you need a billboard, if you need, brochures done, any kind of print ads, social media graphics, social media management, like we can handle all those aspects of that and make sure that every single time someone interacts with your brand, it's going to be on brand, right? Because that's the thing, like I said, it just would drive me insane. I'd see an ad and I take a screenshot and I text it to the owner. I'm like, dude, what happened here? And they're like, oh yeah, you're right, it's the wrong font or it's the wrong colors. And I'm like, why did we invest all this money in branding if we weren't going to continue to use it in a consistent fashion? So
seriously.
we have a few hundred companies that we manage all those aspects of on an ongoing basis. And I love it because now I know no matter what goes out that's public facing, it is going to be 100% on brand. And then about a year or so ago, we actually purchased a digital marketing company and rolled them into KickCharge. So that's been a great thing too. Right now, we currently manage probably about 50 or so home service companies and all their digital marketing efforts too. Because that was the other thing that was driving me crazy is I would see the website they got designed after we did the branding, and it would be generic or off-brand, no voice, no brand story, and I'm like, guys, like we're not maximizing what this brand can do. So it's been cool to be able to sort of control all the aspects of marketing for a lot of these clients now moving forward.
Yeah. Do you see that as kind of the future of KickCharge of kind of being that end-to-end provider of like if you need to get known in your area, we are the place to go.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It was about 6 months ago we launched something called KickCharge One, which again is just all the pillars that you need from the marketing perspective: email marketing, social media management, digital marketing, print collateral, brand. So all the aspects of it basically all under one roof. So instead of needing multiple vendors to
Yeah.
sort of handle all those things, you could come to us and we can facilitate everything under one roof and make sure
That's
it's
cool.
all on brand at the same time.
Right, right. That's cool. That's cool. Have you guys seen any cool stories from that so far? Or is there any cool pieces of knowledge you want to drop from that being released?
I just think, for the companies that we're handling every single piece, I think what they really like about that, first of all, from a management perspective, it's way easier for them to deal with one vendor versus five or six separate ones. So
Yeah,
I think that part just makes the management of your marketing so much easier. And then they can just know that every single thing that goes out, they don't have to think about. It's autopilot. It's going to
right.
be on brand. It's going to be on voice. Everything is very well planned and strategized as far as what goes out, what time of year, especially if you're doing the email marketing. Like everything is dialed in, right? So we just try to take that piece off your plate so you can stay focused on the ops and the other things that you need to stay focused on. And we'll make sure that everything that goes out there is communicating the story that we want.
That's cool. I love that. I love that. let's talk about the hot topic of every podcast that I bring up, but also kind of what everyone's talking about these days, which is AI, right? We're kind of in this information age, this age of artificial intelligence, this age of automation, all that cool stuff. And I've seen some of your comments you've made on social media and stuff about AI and your thoughts, especially when it comes to graphic design, logo design, branding, things like that. A lot of people are seeming to think that AI can kind of replace a lot of what branding agencies and people like you guys do because, oh, I can just go into these various tools and create this logo and have it guide me through the process, right? Talk to us a little bit about what you think the negative impact of AI has had on people's branding by misleading them, and or some of the other pieces where you're really seeing a change in your guys' field because of AI.
Yeah, I think, you touched upon something earlier that I think is really appropriate for this conversation is just the notion of being authentic. So you look at some of these AI generated logos, and first of all, they're just immediately apparent that they're AI generated, right? So I'm not saying that you couldn't use it to maybe spark an idea or maybe get a sense of something, but a lot of them just scream AI. And I always thought it was really strange to think about using an artificial source to build an authentic brand, right? That
Mm,
seems a little contrary to what a brand actually should be doing.
yeah,
There's also just some logistical challenges about, well, it's not obviously vectorized, so like being able to use it and scale it and have it be on the side of a truck, like there's some logistical challenges with trying to use it. I think also you have to recognize the fact that perhaps what gets generated might actually infringe on the trademark or the copyright of someone else, because obviously it's compiling a lot of logos, and sometimes that's a danger right there. So there's a copyright issue that goes into AI generated logos that is something definitely to consider. And I think also, it's kind of funny, and I know that there's been shifts, and I know that it's totally fluctuating, but I was laughing the other day because they were showing that AI is getting so much of its information from Reddit. And I started thinking to myself, is this actually the place where I want to get my strategy from? Like, not to malign Reddit, but I've seen
yeah,
some really horrible things about
yeah.
branding posted in Reddit. I'm just thinking to myself, is
Seriously,
this really where we want to be taking information and basically putting our livelihoods in the hands of a machine at that point?
yeah,
So I think, if you have no other choice and you have no budget and you have nothing else, then you do what you need to do. But I think for the most part, it's a tool that maybe can help you better understand of maybe a direction that you might consider. But I would still think that it doesn't really make a lot of sense in most instances. And ironically, I think, we had probably our best year ever last year. And
mm,
AI's been around for a little while. So I
yeah,
don't think, generally speaking, that the people that want to use AI for branding are our type of clients to begin
yeah,
with.
yeah. I
So
think that's pretty clear.
um, but I think, obviously there's some great things that it can do. I think even sometimes for content to help ideate or to come up with some
Yeah,
concepts or some ideas, there's some great things that it can do. But we see some wacky things that from a design perspective, like fundamental, like issues with it. And I had a post the other day on my Facebook page where a client actually had an AI generated logo, and it was for a roofing company, and it had the fundamentals almost of maybe what could be a starting point.
mm,
But it had a mascot. Like the mascot's facial expressions look really scary and frightening. And it looked almost bizarre. And we took sort of the notion of where it originated from and fixed all the things that were inherently flawed about it. So it was kind of I had sort of the before and after, and I drew up on the AI generated logo all the things that were actually wrong with it and how the new logo actually fixed it. I think it was called Home Run Roofing was the name of the company that we had fixed. But people initially didn't really think that the AI generated logo had any problems until they visually saw the difference between what a brand designer would do versus what a machine would do. And I think that those are the things that some people really don't understand. But visually, when you see it, then you're like, holy shit, like That is a huge difference. But most people would have thought that the first was okay, like it was okay. But oh my God, the second one is so much better. And those are all the emotive characteristics, especially when it comes to mascot design, that AI just has not figured out, and I don't think we'll ever figure out.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I agree. I think when it comes to you're not educated on the topic and you don't really have any clear idea of where you want to go with something, whether it be logo design, whether it be, like you said, content, something like that. AI is a great tool, right? Because it can provide you a lot of information. It can get you part of the way there from zero, right? But again, like you said, if you're long term, right, if you are trying to build something that is truly impactful and that is truly authentic, like we talk about, your point is exactly correct. It's almost stupid to say that something artificial can create a true connection or an authentic response, right? And I see this all the time in my field of work. I mean, our bread and butter at NaiL is AI voice receptionist, right? So AI that answers the phone, books appointments, things like that. And people always I hear people all the time talk about how, oh, it's so inauthentic to have an AI answer the phone, and it should be a human 100% of the time. I'm like, I agree, I agree. The point is not to try and fake authenticity with tools like this, right? That's
Right,
not the
right,
goal. The goal is to try and improve your efficiency, because your humans that you do have that are great and authentic drop the ball. And unfortunately, that's just how it is. I mean, they're not going to work 24/7. They're not going to be
right.
there on holidays. And
Yeah,
so we use these tools to fill gaps, but we're not using these tools to try and fake authenticity. That's why I see so many people that build these tools and that try their best to make it sound as real as possible, and convince people that it's real, and it will refuse to say that it's AI, and it's like, oh, I'm an assistant, or oh, I'm an this and that, and they just won't be. I'm like, guys, that's not. We're not trying to replace this human interaction. We're just trying to fill the gap where humans fail. And
yeah,
I think the same thing is true. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the same thing is true in branding and using artificial intelligence or automation technology like this. Is you're not really trying to replace what is already there, which is the authenticity. You're just trying to help speed up the process, or you're just trying to
mhm,
help try to make it more efficient. And I
yeah,
assume that's how you guys use AI in KickCharge. Is you're not using it to obviously create these logos. You're using it to improve productivity and things like that.
yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. Cool, man. Well, we're coming up on time here, so I don't want to take up too much more of your day. But I did want to ask you if there's anyone out there who's curious about KickCharge. They want to learn more about what you guys can do for them. Maybe they're at that $2 to $3 million mark, and they're feeling like they need a little bit of a boost. What is the best course of action for them to get with you guys, learn more, and maybe work together?
Yeah, sure. If you just go to kickcharge.com and there's a button to fill out to request some information, and we'd love to chat with you. And if you wanted, I know we talked about the book. The title of the book is Branded, Not Blanded. It's on Amazon. It's on our website. I would just say make sure when you're on Amazon that you buy the version of the book that has the black cover. That is the second edition. Through the strange way that Amazon works with second editions, it sometimes wants to sell you the first edition, and I have not been able to sort of figure that out. But just make sure you're clicking on the one with the black cover. That's the newest edition.
That's awesome. Cool, man. Any last pieces of advice, tips, tricks, woes of information that you want to provide to the people?
Um, I'll just repeat what we said earlier, which was success in spite of a poor brand is not a valid reason to perpetuate it. And I'll leave you with that.
There you go. I love that. I'm gonna make that the quote. That's the thumbnail right there.
All right, man.
Awesome. I
Perfect.
love it, Dan. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
You got it, George. Take care, buddy.